Margaret Stone, the head of our HOA, flat out denied my request to build a small koi pond, saying water features weren't allowed on the property. This land has been in my family long before California even joined the union. Her tactics, fear, bureaucracy, and daily nitpicks meant to push me into giving up. She didn't know who she was dealing with. What began as a simple permit request quickly evolved into a long, satisfying fight for what was right. Sometimes, when someone tries to steamroll your history, you have to remind them whose name is on the deed. Before we get into the details, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments and join the Echo Stories community. Now, back to this fight. My family's roots run deep in this land. 2 acres, anchored by a weathered ranch house that's seen more than a century of life. Wide porches, original wood floors, and in the far corner, a dried-up spring that once teemed with trout in my great-great-grandfather's day. It had been lifeless for decades, but lately, I dreamed of bringing it back as a peaceful koi pond. My name's Ethan Hayes. I'm 34, and I recently sold my AI startup for $50 million after a decade of non-stop hustle. Pitch decks, sleepless coding sessions, endless investor calls. It burned me out. I craved calm. This ranch felt like the perfect reset. I wasn't asking for much, just a modest 20 by 30 foot pond, tucked far enough from the road that no one could even see it. But the neighborhood had changed. A rural oasis now boxed in by uniform homes and manicured lawns. I wasn't going to wing it. As a guy from tech, I always do my homework. I brought in professionals, landscape designers, soil analysts, hydrology experts. I mapped drainage, checked zoning rules, even completed an eco-assessment. I went through the HOA rulebook like a legal analyst. The final application was airtight. That's when I met Margaret. 3 days after I moved in, she was at my door, clipboard in hand, eyes calculating, posture stiff like she ironed her spine. Her expression didn't match the smile she forced. "Welcome to Silver Pine Estates," she said in a tone better suited for an interrogation. "I'm Margaret Stone, HOA president, just here to make sure you've reviewed our community expectations." She handed me a binder thicker than a courtroom trial, rules about plant species, mailbox paint, grass height, even how many petals were allowed on your flowers. I tried to play along. "That's very thorough." She raised her chin. "We work hard to protect property values. People who resist usually aren't a good fit here." I submitted my pond plans on a Tuesday. By Thursday, I had a response, though calling it a rejection doesn't quite capture it. It read like a forensic takedown. Margaret had dissected every detail: my choice of fish, warning of algae growth, and even declared the design disruptive to neighborhood visual standards. At the bottom, she'd added a $200 fee for what she called a wasteful filing. I read that letter 3 times. I had followed every guideline, consulted experts, and poured weeks into the design, but she'd dismissed it like junk mail. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about a pond. It was about dominance. The very next morning, a new notice was taped to my door. My lawn, apparently, measured 2.7 inches high. HOA limit, 2.5. Fine, $100. I pulled out a ruler. She wasn't lying, but just barely. The next day, another ticket. This time, my mailbox stood 2 inches taller than allowed. Fine, $150. I checked my neighbor's identical height, but mine was the only one flagged. Then it spiraled. My welcome mat was labeled the wrong shade of beige. My garden hose was partially visible from the street. I parked my car 6 inches too close to the curb. Each morning, a new violation. Each violation, a fine. Within a week, I owed over $800 in citations alone. This wasn't enforcement, it was harassment, a targeted campaign. And that's when I met Walt Morrison. He lived right next door, mid-70s, retired mail carrier. The day I was outside with a tape measure, checking my mailbox again, Walt strolled over and raised an eyebrow. Walt leaned over with a weathered grin, holding his own measuring tape. "So she's got you out here measuring inches now, huh?" he asked, the sun catching the edge of his smirk. I looked up. "You've seen this kind of thing before." He nodded slowly, glancing up and down the street like Margaret might burst from a bush. Same cycle. 3 households in 4 years. She singles someone out, buries them in citations, and keeps turning up the pressure until they sell. You don't have to cross her, just being on her radar is enough. He pulled a faded business card from his wallet and handed it to me. "If it gets worse, call me. I've got records going back years, stuff she's probably forgotten she ever filed." That night, I sat alone on my back porch, staring out toward the dry patch of earth where I'd hoped to build the pond. Across the street, Margaret's home looked like a showroom. Perfect lawn, regulation mailbox, symmetrical flags. My kitchen counter, in contrast, was buried in violation slips. It was clear I had 2 options: back down and hope she found a new target, or push back and show her she picked the wrong property owner. What she didn't realize was that I'd already started digging into her history, and what I was finding could change everything. Margaret Mitov thought she was going up against another passive homeowner, but she had no idea who I was. If you've ever tangled with someone like her, you know what I mean? Leave a comment. If you've had a similar run-in with a neighborhood tyrant, and if you think Margaret is finally about to get what she deserves, type Karen in the comments. I had no intention of letting her steamroll me, not on my own land. If she wanted to weaponize HOA rules, I'd respond in kind. After 10 years in Silicon Valley, I had mastered the art of playing by the letter of the law while completely flipping its intent. And like clockwork, she kept showing up. Every morning, clipboard in hand, ruler ready, treating my property like it was part of a federal audit. Tuesday, 6 inches of grass. Fine $100. Wednesday, 6.2 inches. Another $100. Grass grew overnight, and so did the fines. It was less about order and more about control. She was enjoying it. But here's the thing. About people like me, we're trained to see flaws in systems. And I was about to start exploiting them. It began with the exterior paint. Even though the house had been the same color for 3 decades, Margaret cited me for using an unapproved tone. Fine. I did a deep dive into the HOA's official palette and picked the most painfully bland shade I could find. Administrative tan, they called it. The exact tone you'd see in a DMV waiting room. I hired pros to coat every inch of the house in this dismal hue. It was legal, it was terrible, and it was fully compliant. The next morning, Margaret stormed over, eyes blazing. "What did you do to your house?" she snapped. I stood calm, painted it. AT2847. It's listed right here in the HOA guide. I handed her the official sheet with the approved colors. She stared at the paper in disbelief. It was there. Documented, approved. "That's not what we meant," she muttered. But I didn't let up. "Exactly what you outlined," I replied. "Just doing my part to maintain community standards." Then came the gnomes. Her beloved rulebook allowed for up to 49-yard ornaments, as long as they were deemed respectable and orderly. So I ordered exactly 49 gnomes. Not ordinary one. Was more ridiculous than the last. One wore a luau shirt, another rode a tiny chopper, a third played poker. I lined them up in formation like a gnome honor guard, perfectly spaced across the yard. It looked absurd, but every single gnome was within code. Neighbors slowed their cars just to take photos. Still, it was my next move that really struck gold. The lawn care campaign. Since Margaret was obsessed with my grass height, I decided to make it her daily alarm clock. I bought a commercial-grade mower, the kind used for stadium fields, and began mowing at precisely 6 a.m. Within legal noise limits. It was loud enough to rattle her windows, but completely above board. Every morning, the roar of the mower echoed through the street, and Margaret had no choice but to wake up with it. Compliance had never been so beautifully petty. The split in the neighborhood's response worked in my favor. Some began to catch on, recognizing that if Margaret could go after me like this, nobody was safe. Her obsessive need to punish me started to raise eyebrows, and people who had once kept quiet began to murmur. Still, she didn't let up. She doubled down. Hiring a private investigator to tail me was almost laughable, like a bad movie plot. The guy was about as subtle as a marching band. I spotted him within the first hour. He camped out in a clunky old sedan, camera in hand, snapping photos from behind the wheel. Eventually, I brought him a cup of coffee. "If you're going to hang around all day, might as well be comfortable," I told him. He looked startled and sheepish. "Just doing a job," he muttered. "Yeah," I replied. "I know who sent you. How's she treating you?" Then came the gossip campaign. Margaret didn't just want to penalize me with fines, she wanted to poison my reputation. Word spread that I was unstable, volatile, a danger to the community. She whispered to anyone willing to listen that I was planning something shady or had threatened people. It wasn't long before the cold shoulders started. A few folks steered clear of me entirely, but others, they were starting to question her. Her behavior wasn't subtle anymore, it was erratic. And that's when Frank Stone showed up. Unlike Margaret, Frank had charm. Where she was stiff and rule-bound, he was smooth, confident, and dressed like a man with expensive tastes. One Saturday, he knocked on my door with a bottle of high-end wine and a friendly grin. "Ethan Wright," he said smoothly. "I'm Margaret's husband. Thought we could talk this whole mess over." Mantuman? I was curious, so I let him. And he made himself comfortable on my couch, like we were old friends. "Margaret's a stickler for order," he began, sounding like someone trying to explain away a hurricane as windy, "but I think we might find some common ground." He leaned in, eyes gleaming. "I work in property development. Your home? Beautiful, historic, and in a booming area. I've got clients who'd pay well, cash offers, smooth deals. Might be worth considering." I told him flatly that I wasn't selling. His smile didn't fade, but something in his eyes shifted, colder, calculating. "That's unfortunate. HOA disputes have a way of dragging on. Fines, legal headaches, all that stress. Sometimes, a fresh start is easier." Was that a threat? "Of course not," he said with a smirk. But we both knew what he meant. Just offering a solution. Once he left, I sat outside, running over the conversation in my head. This wasn't just HOA bullying. It was systematic, deliberate, and both Stones were in on it. And what I was about to uncover next would change everything. If you've dealt with people like Margaret and Frank, you'll understand. And if you think something shady's going on here, drop a comment. If you've guessed what's really scam. I did what any founder worth their salt would do. I started digging deep. I pulled public records, property transfers, HOA complaints, and board meeting transcripts from the last 5 years. 10 years in machine learning trained me to spot signals in chaos, and what I found chilled me. On the surface, it looked normal. But once I started mapping it all out, a pattern emerged clear as day. In just 4 years, 3 longtime families had abruptly left the neighborhood under similar conditions. Their stories all began the same sedan citations, mounting fines, vague violations, and pressure to sell. Take the Johnsons. 8 years on Pine Street without issue until early 2019. Suddenly, violations for trash bins, grass height, and parking placement. By spring, they'd listed the home and sold it in 2 weeks cash for 30% under market value. 6 quiet years on Oak Drive. Then in fall 2019, finds for garden decor and house paint. Within months, another fast sale at a massive discount. And in 2021, the Rodriguez's decade on Maple Avenue. Then a sudden wave of complaints, unapproved items, excess noise, unsightly lawn equipment. Sold in December. Same story, same buyer every time. Sunrise Development LLC, and that name, it set off alarms. I went deeper. Delaware Registry Classic moved to hide ownership. But California records peeled back the curtain. Sunrise Development's listed agent was none other than Franklin Stone. That's right, Frank Margaret's husband. I stared at the screen, the pieces snapping into place. This wasn't about koi ponds or lawn height. It was a systematic real estate con. Margaret abused HOA rules to harass homeowners into submission. Frank swooped in and bought the homes for pennies on the dollar. And it didn't stop at Silverpine Estates. Across the county, over 5 years, Sunrise had snatched up 11 properties, all distressed sales, all at major discounts, all closed fast. The plan was chillingly simple, and when I traced the financials, I saw desperation beneath the scheme. Frank wasn't just greedy, he was drowning in debt. Unpaid loans, liens stacking up like dominoes, to bankroll an extravagant resort plan that had been stalled by endless zoning delays. Frank's company had borrowed heavily. Now the clock was ticking. Over $3 million was owed to a syndicate of South Korean financiers, and the repayment deadline loomed, just 6 months away this time with no wiggle room. That same evening, Walt showed up holding a worn cardboard box. "You'll want to go through this," he said quietly. Inside were copies of HOA citations, still frame images from surveillance footage, and even audio clips of Margaret scolding residents like a drill sergeant. "I started collecting this when the Johnsons got pushed out," Walt confessed. "I didn't say anything then, but it never sat right with me." He handed me a separate folder labeled Hayes Ranch Historic Land. That's when everything changed. Flipping through the pages, I discovered an old contract from 1883, signed by my great-great-grandfather. It was an energy easement agreement granting our family legal control over all electrical utility access that crossed our land. That included the main power feed for the entire Silverpine neighborhood. I looked at Walt, stunned. "You're telling me I have the legal right to shut off their electricity, if I have reason?" He nodded. "The clause was never revoked. Still holds up." I sat there in disbelief. Margaret thought she held all the cards, but legally, I'd just found the ace in the deck. The next morning, Frank reappeared, no wine, no charm this time. His expression was cold, all business. "I'm prepared to offer you $2 million for the entire property," he said bluntly. "Cash, no strings. Close in 2 weeks." I stared at him. "That's barely 60% of what this land is worth." His gaze didn't shift. "You and I both know property value is just a number. What matters is the pressure you'll be under if you stay. Margaret's just getting started. Citations, hearings, complaints, years of headaches. She grinds you down. People like you, they don't last here." I took a step closer. "You mean like the Johnsons, Millers, or Rodriguez's? Families your wife drove out so you could buy low and flip high?" His jaw tightened. "You're making baseless claims." I didn't flinch. "I've seen the transfer records, the LLC filings. It's not a theory, it's documented. You bought those homes. Margaret made sure their lives were unbearable until they left." Frank hesitated, then took a small step back. "You're walking a dangerous line." I met his stare. "I've got timelines, documents, witnesses, and that easement contract you probably never even knew existed." His face went pale. "You better be sure about what you're doing." "I am? Are you?" Without saying another word, he turned and walked away. But I could tell by the stiffness in his shoulders he knew I wasn't bluffing. They both knew I wasn't going anywhere. The facade they built was falling apart and I'd just pulled the first brick. Still, I knew things were about to get a lot worse. Frank was desperate, and when Margaret found out I'd unearthed everything, she wouldn't hold back. If you've ever exposed something you weren't supposed to find, let me know in the comments. And if you think Margaret and Frank are about to go full scorched earth type exposed. Frank's cold warning wasn't just posturing, it was the first tremor before the quake. The harassment campaign kicked into overdrive the very next day. Margaret turned every dial to max, determined to make staying here impossible. But now, she'd stopped pretending this was about rules. Her new goal was to obliterate every part of my routine until I had no choice but to cave. She began circling my house like a hawk, clipboard in hand, inspecting every inch with laser focus. She measured the lawn multiple times a day, examined fence lines with a level, and treated my mailbox like it held state secrets. And the violations. They arrived like clockwork. Every sunrise brought new infractions. But they were more ridiculous than ever now. Uneven driveway gravel, inappropriate shadow angles from a tree, and claims that the tone of my wind chime was out of harmony with community standards. I was receiving notices that read like satire. But they weren't funny, they were strategic. Margaret was trying to break me, one absurd rule at a time. The fines jumped from $100 per citation to $250. But that wasn't what broke the stalemate. Margaret's next move wasn't just aggressive, it was personal and malicious. Somehow, and I still don't know how, she got hold of my confidential client list. At the time, I was consulting for several tech firms. She began cold calling each of them, pretending to be a concerned citizen disturbed by my supposed behavior. In her calls, she described me as unstable and prone to outbursts, someone facing legal scrutiny for causing fear in the neighborhood. Not a single thing she said was true, but CEOs don't like even the scent of scandal. One client abruptly canceled a $25,000 deal after a nervous board meeting. Another paused a software rollout I was leading, citing pending issues involving your reputation. But Margaret didn't stop there. She began filing daily police reports, almost like clockwork, falsely accusing me of harassment, stalking, and even unauthorized surveillance. My early morning jogs became threatening behavior. Mowing my lawn somehow counted as intimidation. She claimed my security system, legally installed on my property, was an elaborate spying operation. She even complained about my coffee grinder being too aggressive. Police had to follow up, of course, but I could tell the officers were growing just as tired of her antics as I was. Each week, I'd waste hours explaining that I was merely existing, breathing, moving, living. But I wasn't just sitting around letting this happen. I was getting smarter. I went full Silicon Valley on the situation. I built an airtight defense. I invested in a top-tier surveillance networks, smart sensors, night vision cameras, automatic cloud backups, and 4K video that could hold up in any legal setting. Every conversation I had with Margaret was recorded with time-stamped clarity. Every false accusation, every moment she overstepped, I captured it all. The impact was almost immediate and far beyond what I expected. One night at 3 a.m., my motion alerts pinged. I checked the live feed and there she was. Margaret, creeping around my yard with a flashlight and a tape measure, checking fence lines like some sort of twisted surveyor. Another clip showed her vandalizing my garage with spray paint, and then she really slipped up dumping garbage on my lawn. This time, I turned the tables. I submitted my own complaint to the HOA, improper waste disposal. But the most damning piece of evidence didn't come from a camera inside my house or even in the backyard. It came from a place she probably didn't even think about, right next to my mailbox. Hidden in plain sight, a high-def lens with crisp audio picked up something she never meant anyone to hear. The audio file was gold. Loud and clear, voice rang out. She was on the phone, standing barely 3 feet from the mailbox camera. "I've hit a wall with Hayes," she snapped. "He's not folding like the others did. He's ignoring the fees, dodging the pressure, and I'm running out of tricks." Frank's voice came through the speaker.com, but cold. "What do you mean? He's not reacting?" Margaret huffed. "I've thrown over $4,000 in fines at him in just 60 days. He keeps working, keeps smiling. He's rich enough that it doesn't matter. He's even landing more clients despite the calls I've made. The guy's untouchable." There was a pause. Then Frank spoke again, but this time with edge in his tone. "Then we escalate. No more soft pressure. We make his life such a nightmare, he's got no option but to leave." That was the moment I knew it wasn't just about petty power plays anymore. They were going Elanon. It was about to get uglier. Frank pulled strings in city planning and real estate admin, and soon I was buried in red tape. Permits were delayed. Surprise inspections cropped up. My peace, my time, and my patience, everything they could attack, they did. My home insurance agent reached out, stating they needed to reassess my policy due to inconsistencies in my documentation. Around the same time, the HOA board began combing through my fee history, citing financial irregularities going back 3 years. Next came a letter from city inspectors claiming they needed to evaluate my home for suspected code breaches. Then, the county health office notified me that someone had anonymously reported concerns about my septic system concerns. They now needed to investigate thoroughly. These weren't impossible problems to fix, but they were draining in every way. Financially, mentally, logistically, I was spending thousands just to prove I wasn't doing anything wrong. Lawyers, surveyors, inspectors, I had to hire them. All it was obvious Frank had moved from fines to full-scale bureaucratic warfare. What he didn't count on, though, was that I'd seen this game before, with a decade of experience battling corporate attorneys and a war chest of $50 million. I was better equipped than he could have imagined. His tactics might have overwhelmed someone else, but I knew how to fight back. I assembled a team of specialists, each one an expert in their field. and began turning every investigation into a discovery mission. They tried to bury me, but I used their shovels to dig up everything I needed, and that's when Walt came knocking with an idea that changed the game. He leaned in and said, "That old energy easement your family holds of, been thinking. Maybe it's time to use it the way it was meant to be used." I gave him a curious look. "What are you suggesting?" I asked, catching the shift in his tone. He explained. Frank had been loudly preparing for a major presentation, the kind of pitch that could bring in international capital and cement his resort project once and for all. Word around town was that South Korean investors were flying in. "He's calling it his do or die moment," Walt added. I pulled out the easement agreement from 1883 and reviewed it again. According to its language, I was fully within my rights to halt power transmission through my property with 30 days written notice, provided the interruption was tied to maintenance or improvements. Walt just smiled. "So you see it now," he said. "If you file that notice tomorrow, Frank's big meeting happens 31 days from now, meaning the entire neighborhood would go dark that morning. It was perfectly timed, legal, precise, devastating. If I acted, I'd not only disrupt a $45 million pitch, but send a message to Margaret that her little empire was officially on borrowed time. I could cut power to 47 homes, torpedo Frank's deal, and expose every single abuse they'd piled onto this community." But just as I was finalizing my next steps, I sensed something wasn't right. Margaret hadn't made her last move yet, and something told me that what came next would cross every line. The only question was, how far was she willing to go? Drop a comment. Was this retaliation justified, or do you think I was about to go too far? And if you're ready for what happens when the lights go out, type blackout. The day I filed the 30 notice with Pacific Electric, everything shifted. I wasn't anxious or second-guessing. I was up before the sun, watching dawn spill across the rooftops, feeling not dread but calm clarity. After months of intimidation, relentless fines, and behind-the-scenes sabotage, I was finally the one calling the shots. As I sipped my coffee on the porch, I kept one eye on the HOA sign across the street. In 30 days, that logo would mean nothing. No lights, no meeting, no empire. Just silence and embarrassment. I'd spent the entire night with legal counsel to ensure every detail of the easement was unshakable. Our findings were rock solid. The 1883 agreement was not only still binding, it had never been modified or revoked. We confirmed everything with the power company's legal office, the recorder's department, and the state utilities board. I had all the permits, filings, and notices lined up. There were no gray areas, only firm ground under my feet. Pacific Electric's legal team was surprisingly fascinated. According to their senior manager, it was the first time in decades that an easement from the 1800s would be enforced in a live suburban grid. They weren't just cooperating, they were intrigued. At exactly 9 a.m., I dialed the number. "Pacific Electric. This is Jim Rodriguez from Field Operations. How can I help you?" "Hi, Mr. Rodriguez. This is Ethan Hayes," I replied, steady and composed. "I'm calling to formally submit a 30-day shutoff request under contract E4783, dated 1883, registered under the Hayes family easement rights." There was a pause, then the sound of shuffling papers. "Yes, Mr. Hayes, we've been expecting your call," he said. "Our legal division confirmed everything on your easement. Can you walk me through the reason for the scheduled interruption?" I answered. "Yes, I'm scheduling structural upgrades and electrical access maintenance on the transmission lines crossing my property. All legally required notices were issued. Work will begin on the morning of the 31st day," he confirmed. Receipt, logged the call, and assured me their compliance team would send a written acknowledgement within the hour. I hung up, heart steady, jaw tight. That one phone call had triggered the start of something massive, something no HOA president, no local politician, and certainly no Frank Stone could undo. "I need all electrical service to Section 4 be halted, beginning 30 days from today for maintenance. No projected end date at this time." That's what I told the utility rep over the phone. He replied, "Understood, sir. We'll initiate a scheduled blackout across the entire Silver Pine Estates grid, effective 9 a.m. on the 30th day. But we'll need written confirmation within the next 24 hours. Power will stay disconnected until we receive your formal green light to resume." I didn't waste a minute. I set up a full fail-safe system across my property, battery backups for every security camera, redundant high-speed satellite internet, and a heavy-duty generator powerful enough to run the entire house without interruption. The irony wasn't lost on me. When the lights went out for the neighborhood, my home would be the only one glowing like a lighthouse. That evening, I sat on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the sun set over the homes below, and, for the first time in months, I smiled. In just 30 days, Frank Stone's shady operation would unravel right in front of everyone, and Margaret's chokehold on this neighborhood would finally snap out predictably. Margaret did exactly what I expected. She completely dismissed the easement filing, brushing it off as a desperate move from someone losing his grip. In her official response sent via certified mail, and copied to the entire HOA utility reps, and half the block, she described my actions as erratic and dangerous. She accused me of forging documents, abusing loopholes, and weaponizing obscure land use claims to sow fear. Her letter was dripping with condescension. This easement is clearly obsolete and likely fabricated, she wrote. The community should not give credence to these delusions. Then, in a calculated move, she ramped up her harassment campaign to make my legal action look like the tantrum of an unstable resident under pressure. Her goal was to discredit me, not just dispute my rights. Meanwhile, Frank took a different tack. He called me directly, mocking the entire thing as a tech bro's desperate play. You really think I'm scared of some century-old contract? He scoffed. I've been building in this state longer than you've been alive. I've seen every gimmick, every Hail Mary, from people who don't know how to handle losing. You're just having another outburst. I stayed calm. Frank, I said, in 30 days you'll find out how real this contract is. You're bluffing, he snapped. But his voice faltered just enough to tell me he wasn't sure anymore. He tried to brush it off, adding, even if you do manage to shut off the power, it'll be back on in time. My pitch is scheduled for 1 p.m. A few hours of blackout won't stop me. But what Frank didn't realize was how deeply I'd researched his investors. I knew they were flying in from Seoul. I also knew that their timetable was strict to the minute. These weren't casual entrepreneurs. They were high-stakes financiers who expected nothing short of perfection. If they arrived to find the neighborhood dark, equipment unpowered, or basic amenities none, it wouldn't just be would be catastrophic. One misstep, and they'd walk away. And they wouldn't just back out, they'd blacklist him. Frank didn't understand that a simple blackout wasn't an inconvenience to them. It was a red flag, a signal that he couldn't deliver even the basics. Meanwhile, Margaret still acted like I was flailing in desperation. On day 29, she was more aggressive than ever. As the countdown entered its final stretch, she doubled down completely. Convinced I was bluffing, she hiked the daily violation penalties to $1,000, claiming I was willfully undermining the neighborhood's character and safety. She even circulated a petition demanding my expulsion, citing escalating, dangerous behavior, and managed to scrape together 15 signatures. She filed noise complaints about my generator, accused my garden of being ecologically inappropriate, and even filed a formal objection to the angle of my security cameras. But I knew it wasn't about rules anymore. It was fear. She could feel it slipping. Frank, on the other hand, was panicking behind the scenes while pretending to be calm. He threw himself into prepping his pitch like a man betting his life on one last hand. He brought in a full AV crew, booked a luxury catering service, and kept feeding his investors a fantasy about a flawless event. He hired architects to build scaled models, paid for lighting designers, and even had staff rehearsing transitions. For his slide deck, what he called his most bulletproof business pitch turned out to be the final nail in his empire. He had thrown every last dime, favor, and connection into this one deal. Ironically, while Frank was obsessing over each pixel of his presentation, he was unknowingly prepping for a total collapse. Then came the confirmation call. Mr. Hayes, this is Jim Rodriguez. Per your request, we will disconnect power to Grid 4B tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. That includes all of Silver Pine Estates. The power will remain off until we receive your written clearance to restore it. Can we proceed? We can, I said, my tone calm but undeniably satisfied. That night I sat quietly on the porch, watching the glow from every house. Ceiling fans spun lazily, porch lights flickered, and neighbors carried on their evenings, totally unaware of the storm brewing. I spotted Margaret through her window, likely drafting more violation notices or scheming alongside Frank. 3 doors down, whose house remained fully lit long past midnight, he was making final touches on what he believed would secure his legacy. But tomorrow, with one legally binding move, I was about to bring it all to a standstill. While I'd exposed Frank's schemes and dismantled their con, Margaret looked like she was teetering on the edge of doing something drastic. What happens to a person who built their whole identity around Contraland realizes, too late, that it's slipping away? Drop a comment. Will Margaret retreat quietly or spiral into chaos? If you think she's headed for full-scale self-destruction, type meltdown at exactly 9 a.m. with the sharp finality of a courtroom verdict. The entire power grid to Silver Pine Estates went dark. The result was instantaneous and jarring. Frank's master pitch was dead before it even began. All 47 homes fell silent in a synchronized blackout. Air conditioning units sputtered mid-cycle, garage doors froze, and kitchen appliances beeped before cutting off entirely. Just like that, the daily rhythm of the neighborhood unraveled. From my porch, coffee in hand, and generator humming softly in the background, I watched the result of their months of fines, threats, and intimidation play out in real time. The neighborhood slipped into confusion almost immediately. What started as mild concern quickly erupted into open panic. People emerged from homes in pajamas, shouting questions, frantically redialing on dead cell phones. From across the block, I heard crying children confused by dead tablets, and parents panicking as their work meetings vanished with the Wi-Fi. Vehicles sputtered out of garages stuck halfway open, and the rising heat only made things worse. 98-degree forecast loomed, and without a C, Every house became a pressure cooker. But the real disaster zone? That was Frank's. 3 blocks away, his front yard became the epicenter of the meltdown. I could hear shouting and watch staff darting around in confusion. Today was supposed to be the big one, his $45 million resort pitch, years in the making. At 10 a.m., investors from Korea were scheduled to arrive. He had spared no expense: custom catering, luxury climate setups, scaled architectural displays, and high-tech presentation screens. Instead, the scene was utter dysfunction. No lighting, no working displays, caterers scrambling with no refrigeration. Frank was in the driveway, sweating through his dress shirt, barking into a phone that kept dropping calls. It was like watching a man drown in real time. 15 minutes later, Margaret appeared, visibly shaken. It was the first time I'd seen her without complete composure. For someone who ruled through policies and passive-aggressive memos, this kind of power loss was a language she didn't speak. She couldn't find the source, couldn't spin it, couldn't bully anyone into fixing it, and that terrified her. At 9:30, she stormed across the street toward my porch, trailed by a crowd of hot, confused neighbors, some in sweat-drenched robes, others still holding mugs of now-cold coffee. Frustration was rising, and Margaret was ready to throw blame. "What did you do to our power?" she shrieked. "You've taken down the entire neighborhood. Have you lost your mind?" I stood up slowly, the original 1883 easement paper in my hand. "I've invoked my lawful rights under this electrical access agreement," I explained. "The transmission lines that cross my land are undergoing scheduled maintenance. Proper notice was filed." Her jaw clenched as she shook her head. "This is madness. You can't just flip a switch and cut everyone off. It's criminal." I replied calmly. "Actually, I can. And I did. This contract grants me the right to suspend service for construction or repairs. It's been on record since before any of you lived here." A man near the back of the group raised his hand slightly. "Wait, are you saying this is legal?" "It is," I said. What he called his most bulletproof business pitch turned out to be the final nail in his empire. He had thrown every last dime, favor, and connection into this one deal. Ironically, while Frank was obsessing over each pixel of his presentation, he was unknowingly prepping for a total collapse. Then came the confirmation call. "Mr. Hayes, this is Jim Rodriguez. Per your request, we will disconnect power to grid. 4B tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. That includes all of Silver Pine Estates. The power will remain off until we receive your written clearance to restore it. Can we proceed?" "We can," I said, my tone calm but undeniably satisfied. That night, I sat quietly on the porch, watching the glow from every house. Ceiling fans spun lazily, porch lights flickered, and neighbors carried on their evenings. Totally unaware of the storm brewing, I spotted Margaret through her window, likely drafting more violation notices or scheming alongside Frank, 3 doors down, whose house remained fully lit long past midnight. He was making final touches on what he believed would secure his legacy. But tomorrow, with one legally binding move, I was about to bring it all to a standstill. While I'd exposed Frank's schemes and dismantled their con, Margaret looked like she was teetering on the edge of doing something drastic. What happens to a person who built their whole identity around control and realizes too late that it's slipping away? Drop a comment. Will Margaret retreat quietly or spiral into chaos? If you think she's headed for full-scale self-destruction, type meltdown. At exactly 9 a.m., with the sharp finality of a courtroom verdict, the entire power grid to Silver Pine Estates went dark. The result was instantaneous and jarring. Frank's master pitch was dead before it even began. All 47 homes fell silent, and a synchronized blackout air conditioning units sputtered mid-sound, garage doors froze, and kitchen appliances beeped before cutting off entirely. Just like that, the daily rhythm of the neighborhood unraveled. From my porch, coffee in hand and generator humming softly in the background, I watched the result of their months of fines, threats, and intimidation play out in real time. The neighborhood slipped into confusion almost immediately. What started as mild concern quickly erupted into open panic. People emerged from homes in pajamas, shouting questions, frantically redialing on dead cell phones. From across the block, I heard crying children confused by dead tablets, and parents panicking as their work meetings vanished with the Wi-Fi. Vehicles sputtered out of garages stuck halfway open, and the rising heat only made things worse. A 98-degree forecast loomed, and without a C, every house became a pressure cooker. But the real disaster zone, that was Frank's 3 blocks away. His front yard became the epicenter of the meltdown. I could hear shouting and watch staff darting around in confusion. Today was supposed to be the big one, his $45 million resort pitch, years in the making. At 10 a.m., investors from Korea were scheduled to arrive. He had spared no expense. Custom catering, luxury climate setups, scaled architectural displays, and high-tech presentation screens. Instead, the scene was utter dysfunction. No lighting, no working displays, caterers scrambling with no refrigeration. Frank was in the driveway, sweating through his dress shirt, barking into a phone that kept dropping calls. It was like watching a man drown in real time. 15 minutes later, Margaret appeared, visibly shaken. It was the first time I'd seen her without complete composure. For someone who ruled through policies and passive-aggressive memos, this kind of power loss was a language she didn't speak. She couldn't find the source, couldn't spin it, couldn't bully anyone into fixing it, and that terrified her. At 9:30, she stormed across the street toward my porch, trailed by a crowd of hot, confused neighbors, some in sweat-drenched robes, others still holding mugs of now-cold coffee. Frustration was rising, and Margaret was ready to throw blame. "What did you do to our power?" she shrieked. "You've taken down the entire neighborhood. Have you lost your mind?" I stood up slowly, the original 1883 easement paper in my hand. "I've invoked my lawful rights under this electrical access agreement," I explained. "The transmission lines that cross my land are undergoing scheduled maintenance. Proper notice was filed." Her jaw clenched as she shook her head. "This is madness. You can't just flip a switch and cut everyone off. It's criminal," I replied calmly. "Actually, I can, and I did. This contract grants me the right to suspend service for construction or repairs. It's been on record since before any of you lived here." A man near the back of the group raised his hand slightly. "Wait, are you saying this is legal?" "It is," I said. "This is what we call